President Trump took it a step further today, backing not just prison reform, but the sentencing that puts people behind bars in the first place. After months of balking, President Trump today threw his support behind a compromise bill to reform how criminals are penalized.
The bill includes reasonable sentencing reforms while keeping dangerous and violent criminals off our streets.
Among other things, the First Step Act would shorten mandatory minimum sentences for nonviolent drug offenses, change the 3 strikes you're out penalty from life in prison to 25 years, eliminate the stacking regulation that makes it a federal crime to possess a firearm while committing another crime, and end the disparity between crack and powdered cocaine possession. President Trump was wary of supporting the measure, fearing it would make him appear soft on crime. His former attorney general wanted no part of it.
There's still those who would like you to believe we should release criminals early, shorten sentences for serious traffickers, drug traffickers. That would be, in my opinion, bad for the rule of law. It would be bad for public safety.
But after several law enforcement groups backed the new measure, the president felt it safe to jump on board.
In many respects, we're getting very much tougher on the truly bad criminals, of which, unfortunately, there are many. But we're treating people differently for different crimes.
All right, here's something important our friend Teslin Figaro said on last week's show.
You have a crime bill right now that Cory Booker's begging for people to get on board. When we talk about mass incarceration going from 500,000 in 1980 to 2.2 million now, there are American citizens who are locked up right now, but yet our concern is on those who are trying to break in America. But it is also important to point out that 97% of people in jail took a plea deal because they did not have adequate representation. So grew up in the 90s. Hundreds of people were destroyed through Bill Clinton's crime bill, and nothing's been being told about that.
She's talking about the First Step Bill, a historic reform of the criminal justice system that President Trump and his team have worked hard to negotiate. Here's the president.
Today, I'm thrilled to announce my support for this bipartisan bill that will make our community safer and give former inmates a second chance at life after they have served their time. So important.
He's right, and this is a major populist issue just as much as immigration or trade. Let's remember what positive populism is all about. Pro-worker, pro-family, pro-community. Bill Clinton's 1994 crime bill ended up incarcerating millions of working Americans, far too many of them African Americans, for far too long, hurting their ability to work and earn a living, contributing to family breakdown and helping to tear apart the social fabric in our communities. Turning that around is a fantastic accomplishment, and leaders from all sides are on board. You've got Mike Lee.
This bill would deal with that and would tell judges that they've got discretion to actually be judges. And it will make life better for millions of Americans who, one way or another, are affected by our federal criminal justice system.
You've got Democrats, including Dick Durbin and Cory Booker. You've even got Van Jones, of all people. Check out his praise for President Trump. You'd think with all that support, this bill would easily pass Congress. That's what the bill's sponsor, Senate Judiciary Chairman Chuck Grassley, is hoping. Here's his tweet. Dealmaker, at real Donald Trump can get a big bipartisan deal done this year on criminal justice reform. Plenty of time to pass First Step Act in December. Will GOP senators and Leader McConnell stand in President Trump's way of achieving major bipartisan victory or join in historic and popular reform? And there's the problem. There's one hitch in all this. Mitch McConnell seems to think his only job in life is confirming judges. Of course, that is vital, but so is President Trump's agenda, and it would help if the Republican Senate Majority Leader could actually help pass it. Instead, he's blocking it. He won't bring the First Step bill for a vote because, well, it's not exactly clear.
We don't have a whole lot of time left, but the first step is to finalize what proponents are actually for. There have been a lot of different versions floating around, and then we'll whip it, see where the vote count is.
Another objector is outgoing Tennessee Senator Bob Corker. A lot of people like me are still trying to understand what it does, he said. There had only been a higher-level discussion of whether we should attempt to do it. A higher level? I think the explanation is on a much lower level, the one that Washington usually operates on, money. Blocking this bill would leave more people in jail. Now, who would be most in favor of that? The prison industry, of course. And guess who's received more money from private prison companies than any other member of the Senate? That's right, good old Bob Corker. Don't bother wiping the mud off on your way out of the swamp, Senator. And Mitch McConnell's opposition to this bill, which has mystified many people, makes a little more sense when you discover that he has received, wait for it, over $500,000 from private prison companies and their financial interests over the years. Never mind cocaine, Mitch. This is corrupt, Mitch. Put people first, not donors. Do the right thing. Pass this bill. Tell me what you think at Steve Hilton X and at NextRevFNC. Trina, you wrote about this just today on FoxNews.com.
I did. I wrote about it today because it's something that is close to me. It's personal. Occasionally in politics, you come across a policy that actually means something to you, and this happens to be one of them. Being a woman of color, born to a teenage single mother, growing up in poverty, somehow navigating my way through this government-imposed learned helplessness community, managed to be the first to graduate from college and broke the poverty cycle in my family. And it was because I had access to people who actually cared and offered tools and resources so I could make better decisions for my life. Everyone deserves that chance. You have people today, and don't get me wrong, we have the best system in the world. It is the best. However, I don't think anyone can say with a straight face that justice is blind or that justice is handed out evenly in this country. But that should be our goal, and I think that this act gets us a little bit closer to it.
So tell me, I think you might disagree.
Well, overall, justice reform for me has been a big issue, and a bit of people have touched on this when it comes to the issue of people who do plea deals because they've got a public defender who's got 1,000 other clients, and they just want to move you through the system, and so you plead something that you actually didn't do, and that's, of course, effects of the disenfranchised and the poor. So when I think criminal justice reform, I think justice reform, especially when we're not dealing with criminals who get stuck within that framework and who don't get justice. The problem with this bill is what the president said it would do: it make communities safer and get justice for people who are languishing in prison who shouldn't be there. We saw an example of that with Kanye West and Kim at the White House with a woman who was involved in some kind of a drug deal, sentenced to life in prison, right? And that's the only crime she committed. Americans realized that that was inappropriate. This bill, however, in moving from the House to the Senate, changed. And it changed to include retroactive sentencing changes to where people would be let out automatically. And it created one dynamic of specifics about who would be blocked from that, but not include people involved in domestic violence, strangling your spouse, assaults with deadly weapons, prison breaks, drug trafficking, holding immigration papers to keep people in slavery so that they can't escape. So if we are going to be releasing those people or giving them an easier time to get out of prison, they're going to go right back to the community.
Nobody who'd be
making
left.
Those communities even more dangerous.
I agree with you completely. I don't think any Republican anyway wants to support a bill that's going to let violent criminals back out on the streets. And there are 52 categories of violent crimes that would make you ineligible to get any benefit from these sentencing reforms. Here's the fact: we just got to deal with reality. And I know all of us want to do that. 95% of these people who are in federal prisons, they're coming out. And they're either going to come out with more skills, they're going to come out living closer to...
Oh, the first bill was about that. It was about skills and all of that, which we all agree with.
Let me keep rolling on this, because I do think that the Senate bolted on some of these changes. But let's get back to the fundamental. People are coming out of prison. And if they come out needing to immediately be dependent on the federal government or somebody, again, because they don't have the skills, because they haven't bonded with the constructive family relationships that they could have had. If we don't treat women with decency, pregnant women in prison, and don't shackle them and treat in almost barbaric conditions.
But that's not this bill, though.
Yes, it is this bill.
But it includes this other aspect.
Let me just finish.
Change is my point.
Let me finish. So that is the fundamental thrust of the bill. And that's why they call it the First Step Act. Because it's understanding the government gets many things wrong. You know what the government also gets wrong? The government also gets wrong its approach to federal prisons. And we need huge reforms. This is just the first step. There are many more. And I'll tell you, next step we need reining in crazy prosecutors that have the power to destroy anybody they want. That might need to be the second step.
I just want to leave it there.
Can I add one more thing to Matt's point about there are 50 offenses that make you completely ineligible. every other case after that, there's not this broad open, let's open the doors and let the criminals out. There's a case-by-case basis that these people are looked at, and individual reforms are determined whether or not they can be
Let's just say that we know this bill changed, and making more changes would be appropriate, and we can get to where we need to be.
The thing that I'm really, fed up about is that McConnell doesn't look like he's interested in that at all. He just wants to block it. Right.
I don't know if that's right.
Well, come on, then show us that it's wrong, Mitch McConnell.
That's a fair.
So this is an issue that has divided communities and families, but it is not a divisive issue. It is such a no-brainer, and obviously you can go much further with legislation. But what does the First Step Act do?
The First Step Act has a couple of main features. The first part of it deals mostly with prison reform. As you said, giving incentives to prisoners currently serving time in a federal prison to take courses and otherwise prepare themselves to reenter society without reoffending. The second part of it deals with sentencing reform, and it deals with some of our more thorny and draconian provisions of our federal sentencing law that over time have over-federalized criminal law and resulted in these massive sentences, like a young man that was prosecuted in Utah for a federal offense for selling 3 dime bags of pot over a 72-hour period. And because of the way he was charged, he got 55 years in prison as a minimum mandatory. This bill would deal with that and would tell judges that they've got discretion to actually be judges.
All right, and what are the chances that it passes the Senate, where you are?
The chances are very good. Look, if this bill were brought up today, it would pass overwhelmingly. It would pass with a veto-proof supermajority, I believe. Not that we would need it, because President Trump would himself sign it, as he indicated today. So I'm encouraging our leadership in the Senate to bring this bill up, bring it up now. Let us vote on it now. This will pass overwhelmingly. It'll bring a big bipartisan victory, and it will make life better for millions of Americans who, one way or another, are affected by our federal criminal justice system.
This is obviously an important issue for the president's son-in-law, who was also one of his chief policy advisors, Jared Kushner, and his wife, Ivanka Trump. But this was almost diametrically opposite to some of Jeff Sessions' view of the criminal justice system. So with Sessions now having resigned, does that mean that this administration starts anew on this very issue?
Well, I think it can, and in any event, Jeff Sessions, who was his attorney general until just a few days ago, didn't persuade him to not support it. And so the president keeps his own counsel. The president makes his own decisions. The president decided today to support this bill. And so we've got the full support of the administration. And like I said, we've got the support, I believe, of a supermajority in both houses of Congress. The House version of this bill passed with 360 votes just a couple of months ago. I believe that with these additions, we will keep that number, if not increase it in the House, and we can also get it passed in the Senate.
And how is this something that there is pressure to pass in this lame duck session before the new Congress is sworn in January? Or are you confident that Democrats are going to get on board, because you have been working across the aisle and across chambers with Democrats on this issue?
Yeah, that's right. And I've been working for about 8 years, ever since I've been in the Senate, on this issue. Initially, it was me and a whole lot of Democrats, not as many Republicans as we've got now. Over time, people have realized it's neither Democratic nor Republican. It's neither liberal nor conservative. This is just a good public policy issue. It's an American issue. But I'm glad you asked that question about this Congress versus the next one. I believe, Kennedy, that this needs to get done in this Congress. We don't know what demands the Democratic-controlled House of Representatives might make in the next Congress. I actually have some grave doubts about our ability to pass in the Senate whatever they will pass in the Democratic-controlled House next year, and our ability to get something like that signed by this president. So now is the time. President Obama tried for 8 years to get this done. He wasn't able to do it.
Yeah.
President Trump has the opportunity to do it now, but Congress needs to act now.
Do you think, as far as immigration, health care, building the wall and wall funding, where does this stand in the docket in the short term before January?
Well, like a measure to keep the government funded and like measures to fund border security, this is one of the things that I think has got to be addressed one way or another before the end of the year. We do have time. We do have a couple months. In fact, we have until noon on January 3rd of next year. So let's get it done now.
Thank you, God bless you, and God bless America.